Hi, good evening. Hopefully, you can hear me and see me, and the technology is actually working. We're going to just have a couple more minutes. We'll see people are still joining. So it's about 2 minutes to 7:30, so we're not quite there. So we'll start the actual slides going in a moment. But yeah, for now, hopefully you can actually see and hear me, which is obviously a good start. There is a chat facility, but I do get distracted, so I will come back to it, in and out of it, rather than sort of respond to it all of the time. So hopefully that will be okay, and I won't keep going to question and answers all of the time. So let's just check who is still coming. We'll get going in about just over a minute, and then we'll get started. So grab yourself a drink if you haven't got one, and we'll have a couple of minutes and we'll get going. Another minute or so, and then we'll go. People are still coming in. Right. We may as well, I think, get started. So I think we'll get started now, and we'll just go from there. So do pop up and ask questions, but there will be opportunity for sort of better question and answers at the end, where I can actually put more of my attention to them rather than try to distract myself by doing two things at the same time. So we'll get started. Off we go. So I am, as you can see from the screen, hopefully, Louise Messiah, and I am a nutritional therapist and an author of my book, How Food Shapes Your Child, which is all about nutrition in early years, particularly how food goes into the different elements that make children, which obviously then make adults. So food is so important in all areas of our health. So it's about really the different foods that make us tick. And I'm a food writer as well, in terms of magazine publications, articles, and online things like this, which you're here for at the moment. So what we're going to cover today in tonight's webinar is particularly looking at sugar, so particular emphasis on sugar. So sugar and health, and why is sugar and health so important? We'll look at some of the statistics around why I focus on it. It's not just me being anti-fun, and it's not just me being a bit of a killjoy. There are reasons why I kind of like to focus on sugar, and there's some health statistics as to why it's so important. The other thing is, where is sugar? So it's not just a cake or sweets, it's everywhere. So we'll be looking at where does it lurk, and we'll look at some of the quantities, which may be a little bit surprising as well. Interlinking elements of health. With health, there's always sort of like a jigsaw of things that happen, and it's never just one thing. It's never just we can't have this because it will make us overweight, or we have this and it will do this. There's always lots and lots of different things with nutritional science. So what I'd like to do is look at all the interlocking elements, and actually, where does this have a knock-on effect with another something in our health? And as I say, it's not just me being anti-fun, which often when you say let's drop sugar, people think you're just a bit anti-fun. So as I mentioned with question and answers, I do get distracted with the chat box, and I've actually lost the chat box. I don't actually see where the chat box has gone at the moment. So I will get distracted with that, like I've just got distracted trying to find it. So I will come back to question and answers, and I do get a report of them. So please do feel free to put them in, because I do get a report and I will see them at the end. So I will get to see them, whatever you submit, so don't worry about that. What else have we got on here? There is an offer, of course, at the end. I have a few offers, including some companies that I'm teamed up with to offer you some unique discount codes for products that I and my little boy like. So that I don't often trust companies, because often I'm the opposite. I'm kind of saying, oh, I wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. So it's quite rare for me to actually be saying, you should try these, they're great. And don't worry about making loads of notes, because you can have a copy of the presentation. You can have, any of the handouts are available as well. There should be 3 handouts during this webinar. So you don't need to scribble away furiously while we're going. So let's move on. So what is wrong with sugar? Why am I doing this webinar, and why is there so much in our health about sugar? Why do we have initiatives all over the place around sugar? I'm going to just launch a poll and see what you think from your perspective. what you think is the most in terms of health, what you think are your most concerning factor of sugar, and what do you feel the most concerned about in terms of what impact it might have. So hopefully you can all see that poll. And let's just wait till there's a nice cross section of results actually, which is interesting because actually it's a nice even split at the moment. So let's just wait till everybody's finished voting, and then we'll have a look at the collective responses, which is quite interesting. Let's have a look. We're nearly there with everybody. When everybody's finished popping their answers in, then we can have a look at the results. Nearly there. We're at 88% now, so we're just waiting on a few people to make their final decision, and then we can actually have a look at the results. So it's quite an interesting one because obviously there are a lot more. Right, okay, everybody has submitted it now. So hello again, and then I will show you the results. So now you should be able to see those results. It's quite interesting. As I was saying, there are so many interlocking areas of health. And when I do this poll in different scenarios, it's always a different result with people. And interestingly, that weight is actually, quite a low health factor in terms of, what you're potentially worrying about with sugar, because often that's what the media really focus on in terms of the health risk and things like that. So hopefully you've all seen those results. Let's hide those, and then I should be back. Here we go. Because there is so much more to what sugar does, and why I talk a lot about sugar than weight. And often that is the primary focus for adults as well as children. The primary focus with not eating this, or yes, we should eat this, is often to do with weight, and nutrition is so much more influential than just our weight. As you'll know if you're in my last webinar about why not to diet. So some of the statistics, and these are UK statistics, as to why sugar is a health concern. We do have a weight concern. Obviously, we have a weight concern with adults, and we do have a weight concern with children. 2 in 10 children are overweight or obese, which is quite a frightening statistic, particularly as overweight children do tend to be overweight adults. And children, as we're seeing more and more, are not exempt from the health conditions that adults get, which I'll come back to a little bit later. So 1 in 4 5-year-olds, which is quite sad, have tooth decay in their milk teeth. Milk teeth, that makes me quite sad. The enamel on children's teeth is actually very weak. It's still developing. And so any sugary foods and drinks, particularly ones that have a prolonged time in the mouth, like sweets and lollies, they're really, really damaging to children's teeth because their enamel is still really, really weak. So their teeth are not as capable of coping with the amounts of sugar as adult teeth are, and yet unfortunately children have quite a lot of sugar. Now this one, it was quite a low response rate on the poll because probably and understandably you think type 2 diabetes in children is not really, that's for later in life. But we have seen in the last few years 40% increase in type 2 diabetes in children, and that's under 16s. And this is following on from, in the last 10 to 15 years, type 2 diabetes is no longer called adult onset diabetes. It used to be an adult disease, very much an adult lifestyle-led disease. But in recent years, we've started to see more and more under 18s get it. And now, there's an 8-year-old diagnosed a few weeks ago. I was talking to a doctor in London, and they diagnosed an 8-year-old with type 2 diabetes. So if you imagine the metabolic decline that has to have taken place for type 2 diabetes, then what on earth are we eating for a child to have that accelerated by age 8? So it's quite frightening, and that is why I do these talks on sugar, because it's not just it's okay. It's actually, no, it's not. What are we eating? What can we do about it? So type 2 diabetes in children is, scarily, it is a risk, and it is something that we need to consider. Going a little bit biological here, nutritional biochemistry, which I talk a lot about in my book, does show that a child's body and brain are both adversely influenced by sugar and trans fats. And I don't have time to talk an awful lot about trans fats in this particular webinar because we are focusing on sugar, but often the two go together, and together they're a very bad combination. Both of those things have negative impact on a child's body and brain. and we will focus a little bit more on brain. The next webinar, actually, while I remember, I'll get this in, the next webinar on the 26th of February is actually all about the brain and how children's food and nutrition actually impacts on their cognitive abilities. Sugar, most definitely, the intake of sugar impacts on memory, learning, and ultimately IQ. There are links, there are studies that look at actually, IQ levels in children at certain developmental ages and diet and lifestyle. And excess of sugar is a contributing factor to a lower IQ. Again, I'll talk about more of that in the brain development course. And often what happens is, I go back to that jigsaw of health and what might be missing, is when you have foods that are sort of full of sugar and certain way of eating, it's not just that you're eating them, it's what you're not eating by eating them, if that makes sense. And so all the things that exacerbate what's wrong with the sugary food are also linked to all the things that are in the foods we should be eating, but potentially we're not. So it's very much a jigsaw. It's not just a let's never eat sugar again and we'll all be really healthy. It is what should we be eating? And that's where I come in. So why is it so different? Why is it so different? I often hear, never did me any harm, and often I often hear this argument from parents, and it's completely understandable. I grew up in the 80s. We did have all manner of rubbish, I'm sure, and it was never really an issue. It was never really a concern. What is so different now? We have a very, very different food landscape. I talk about this an awful lot. Our food landscape that our children today, so that, the young generation today, sorry, my hair's irritating me. Their food landscape is not comparable to any previous food landscape. So we have got this sort of array of products for convenience and processed foods that we did have, but the abundance of it is now so much more that actually even the healthy things, are part of this landscape as well, in terms of having, the artificial ingredients, the sugar, the trans fats. And so as a parent, you think, oh, we'll have this once in a while and we'll eat the healthy things a lot of the time. Those healthy things are not what they used to be. And so actually the norm of a diet has changed an awful lot. And then there's all the other factors that go into that, like the nutrients, the mineral quality of the soil is depleted. We've got lots of artificial farming. We've got lots of pesticides. And so actually a lot of us, adults and children, are actually lacking in a lot of nutrients, which would undo some of the damage. And so it's back to that jigsaw. It's back to that, what are we eating that's bad, and what are we eating or not eating that should be good. And then I hear also the argument, well, we just burn it off as kids. We run around all the time. We're really active. But unfortunately, children are not as active as they used to be. But even if they were active, they don't actually burn off a junk food diet, because they have, going on to the next slide down, they have underdeveloped detoxification systems. So junk food, sugar, trans fats and salt actually put a real burden on their little bodies. If you imagine, they're like an adult, but they're, as in the biology, but they're quite different in that everything's underdeveloped and they're a lot smaller. And so all the things that we shouldn't eat, but can kind of deal with in terms of getting rid of the rubbish and the toxins, they also shouldn't eat, but it places a huge burden on them to try and detox them from their body. And so it never did us any harm. No, but we're not comparing like for life. Children just burn it off. No, they don't. They're not as active. And even if they were incredibly active, they still wouldn't be able to burn it off, because the biological burden it places on them is greater than it is for an adult. So it's not just me being a killjoy, and I do keep coming back to that because I do get called it often. So just to justify myself and say I'm not a killjoy. So when did a treat become a health epidemic? Now, I talk a lot about the changing food landscape, and I talk a lot about what has happened to our health and what's happened to the food landscape. Go back in time to 1970s. And that's when convenience food really came in. And that's when, you know, processed food became like this revelation that we can have food from the freezer to the microwave. We can, you know, we can eat this type of food every night because it's really cheap. And it became a real difference. But what's happened from 1970 to today is a real decline in our health, and not just in terms of obesity. Obesity rates have, you know, trebled worldwide since then. And it's also correlation with the launch of the diet industry, which is not unnoticed in my webinars. But the real issue in terms of when did a treat become a health epidemic is actually when the treat becomes the norm. And that's back to, it's not just the things we associate as treats that contain the ingredients that we would associate as treats. It's actually the majority of the food landscape, because the food landscape has changed so much. And that's mainly to do with convenience, and that's mainly to do with convenience over health. And that is, unfortunately, a modern food issue, is that we want things to be convenient, and a lot of the time you can't have convenience and nutritious food at the same time. So it sort of does come back to, you know, real food. I always talk about real food and real cooking and things like that. But we'll come back to that because it's not all overly daunting. I promise you that. So just to sort of summarize all of that, I'm not anti-fun at all, but when is a treat and when is it damaging? One of the things in my book that I talk about is the link with food and reward, and food and comfort, and treating with food, and recognizing and praising with food, and what kind of emotional attachments that makes with food. So I have a real thing about food being called a treat, but that is a different subject, and I will again talk about that a little bit in the next webinar on brain development and emotional reactions with food. But really, in the last 50 years, sorry, I keep looking over here, I'm not being rude, I have notes, I can't see the screen because I just have my big face looming at me out the webcam. So in the last 50 years, the increase in food convenience and all of those sugars, trans fats and artificial ingredients that go into the food have really fueled this worrying decline in health. Lots of the lifestyle diseases that we have now are actually a lot to do with what we actually eat and what we don't eat. There's two things there. So of course we have an increase in obesity, but we can't differentiate what we eat and mental health. And as you know, I think another webinar I've got coming up, I think I've got the date scheduled, is on that particular thing, food and mood. Food has a huge impact on our mental health, and with children, we're seeing a big decline in mental health in children, children with anxiety, children needing to do mindfulness, children needing to, you know, do relaxation and have cards to teach them to deal with their emotions. Children didn't used to need these things, and yes, our external environment has changed hugely, so there are some influences on our external environment, but we can't ignore the link that food has, good and bad, and sugar is one of the bad things when it comes to that link with mental health. So I'm going to launch another poll now, so just bear with me, and this one is all about the sugar tax. So we've had all of this change with the food landscape, and government think, of course, and rightly so, we need to do something about it. One of the things they have done is to introduce the sugar tax. Now, I just want to get your thoughts on what you feel the sugar tax, has it helped or has it not, or are you not sure? So I'm just going to distribute that poll. Really interested to see what you think on this one. I have very strong opinions on this one, but let's see what you all think. We're at about 75% now, so nearly getting all the responses in. And then I will share the results with you. 9,200, right, there we go. So me, there I am. Share those with you. Let's have a look. So interestingly, the majority of you share my view that the sugar tax hasn't actually helped situation. And I talk about this quite a lot. You get me back. Am I back? There I am. So the sugar tax came in as I feel, sticking plaster approach. So we're eating too much sugar. What can we do about it? Let's get manufacturers, because ultimately they are the ones in control of the recipes. Let's get manufacturers to reduce the sugar. What happens when they reduce the sugar, as you'll know if you've ever been on a diet, is instead of sugar, they will put in lots of artificial sweeteners. Now, artificial sweeteners, coming back to the link with mood, with brain development, with our mental health and things like that, are very, very confusing for the body, but they're also quite confusing metabolically. So when you trigger something that's sweet, and that can be a 100-calorie thing, 500-calorie thing, or a 0-calorie thing, triggers the same response in the body. Doesn't have the same impact on your blood glucose, so it doesn't spike and things like that, but it has the same on your cravings. Sugar, as we all know, is very addictive. So when you have something sweet, you want something sweet. It's the same whether it's a synthetic artificial sweetness or a natural sweetness. It's more so with the synthetic sweetness than with natural sweetness. So for me, the sugar tax has basically meant that you cannot now buy anything without it being full of artificial sweeteners. And that is a real bugbear for me, because I now have to find my time in the supermarkets where I would have had something quite happily previously, because I would always say to clients, yes, it's sugar, but the body can metabolize sugar. If you're going to have a gin and tonic, have a gin and tonic with a full sugar version of the tonic, because the body can deal with it. Don't have the artificial sweeteners because the body doesn't know what it is, doesn't really know what to do with it. Now you have to scrutinize all of the labels to find out what's got these pesky things in and what doesn't. And the other thing is, it's made everything more expensive. So are people going to really change their buying habits if their children are addicted to a certain drink? No, it's just going to cost that family more. It hasn't addressed the situation. It's just kind of made it a bit confusing. So no, I'm glad you agree with me. So that kind of, it means I'm singing from the right hymn sheet. So yes, I don't feel it has helped. I think it's made things confusing, and I don't think it makes any difference to our health. I just think artificial sweeteners are another ticking time bomb. What are they doing to us? We don't really know. They've been around for maybe 60 years, but they're now getting more and more prevalent. And the combination of them with other ingredients is getting to be a real cocktail. And we don't really know what that's doing to our health because they've not really been around long enough. So I choose to avoid them, but that is my personal opinion. Let's have a look at what else sugar influences. So other considerations, all of these on here are things, oh, they do a little wiggle. All of these conditions and, moods and things like that, all are things that sugar influences on. So I can't see if they've all finished wiggling, so I'll just, oh, there we go back to them for a moment. So sleep. As an adult, if you have, blood sugar spikes, you're up and down and up and down. It's no different for children. So if they're eating the wrong types of food at the wrong types of day, it will impact on their sleep. If they're a bit buzzing around a lot through the day, they might not wind down enough to sleep at night time. And as parents, we want our children to wind down. We want our children to wind down so we can have some time, so that we can get a good night's sleep. Children that won't wind down are quite frustrating. We all know. So sleep is one of the big factors with regulating your blood sugar, but also what might be missing from the diet that enables good sleep. There's lots of foods that fuel sleep, that fuel the link with melatonin, which is what makes us feel nice and calm and relaxed and sleepy at the right time of day. So lots of foods that we might be missing that might be doing the job, and lots of things that we're adding in with sugar that are undoing those. Emotional eating adults, I alluded to this earlier. If we praise and reward and, sort of give food as a real, oh, let's have this when we're feeling a bit, down, it is linked, neurologically. Those food memories go deep into the hippocampus and they stay there. So as an adult, you will be harping back to something that happened in childhood relating to food. You might not think this, it might be completely subconscious, but that relationship with what that food did and what that food made you feel will go back to if you were rewarded with it or comforted with it, or in some way felt that you'd had a real treat by having this ice cream, and it was a really great day because we had this ice cream. Probably would have been a really great day without the ice cream, but the food memory gets lodged there in the hippocampus. And so we don't want to make too much of the naughty foods being treats, because we don't want emotion. We want to be in control of our emotions with food. And if you are an emotional eater, it's quite horrible to feel out of control and to feel that when you're stressed or bored or upset, that food is the crux, because it never makes you feel any better. And often it makes you feel worse, because afterwards you then feel guilty and you don't feel very good about yourself. And so we don't want to fuel that sort of relationship with food. It's all about balance with me. If you have teenage children, often the only way to get to them is how they look. So skin, sugar is very, very bad for your skin. It's very aging. It attacks the collagen of the skin, which is what it gives its elasticity and, you know, stops wrinkles and things like that. So skin, and, you know, if you have teenage girls in particular who have a lot of sugar, that could be the way to you know, telling them about type 2 diabetes and other things like that might not work, but their skin might. It's unfortunately, it's often the case. Concentration, with adults as well as children, that blood sugar cycle, up, down, up, down, up, down, really impacts on our ability to concentrate. So for children who are particularly children of school age, they have their breakfast and then they have quite a long time until lunch, but they're obviously expected to retain focus and attention and take in information and retain information during that morning. It's very difficult to do that if their blood sugar is going up and down. But unfortunately, a lot of breakfast cereals that are actually aimed at children are quite high in sugar, and it does fuel that blood sugar spike. And whenever there's a blood sugar spike, there's also a neurological spike, because the emotions linked with food happen when the blood sugar goes up and down and up and down. So it's quite difficult for that child to concentrate at school if they have a high sugar breakfast. So concentration is massively affected by sugar. Behavior, controversial one, this one, because it, you know, people say, oh, you know, the chocolate's kicked in, the sweets have kicked in, off they go. But actually, it does have a response. It does have a reaction in the body. Now, if you imagine yourself, you go and, you know, you eat a load of cake or sweets or something, and you're like, you feel a bit wired and you feel like you've got loads of energy. As an adult, you kind of know what to do with it, but as a child, you might not really know what to do with that energy. So often the energy is displayed as, you know, a surge of activity, which could be a surge of naughtiness or just a really random, strange sort of get up and dance or something bizarre, because actually the child just doesn't know what to do with themselves. They can't sit still, they don't know what to do. And it, you know, that's often perceived as bad behavior. And yes, it is often linked with sugar, but there is a lot more that goes into behavior, obviously, than just the sugar element. Sorry, headphones are sliding. Gut health. I love talking about gut health, and with good reason, because lots of the things I've spoken about are actually linked back to the gut as well. So the gut helps to manage our emotions and things like that, but that's a whole different story. Sugar, unsurprisingly, is not very good for our gut health. So when the gut health is affected, lots of other things can be affected as well, including sleep and immunity, and lots of other more nasty conditions as well, but that's over a longer period of time. But just, you know, in terms of sugar and gut health, not friends, not good. We spoke about emotions, and that's linked with, you know, that partly the blood sugar spike, but also partly what's missing. And then malnourishment. Now, you may be surprised, you may not, to know that we are actually living in a malnourished society, even here in the UK, where we have an abundance of food and we generally live in an overweight society. We do have a malnourished society as well, and the World Health Organization has actually reclassified the definition of malnourishment. It's no longer somebody who's starving, it's actually somebody with a bad diet, because worldwide, I think 44% of the world's countries are actually malnourished, and that is Western countries as well, is where you traditionally associate being malnourished with. And that is because we're eating a lot of empty calories. So nutrient devoid foods, the things that we've been talking about which do us harm, generally are doing us no good. Lastly, fussy eaters. If you constantly have a child who doesn't want to try new things and is wary of vegetables and wary of different cuisines and things like that, it could be that they've got overused to a particular synthetic taste, often in foods for children. But artificial sweeteners, artificial sugars, artificial, you know, fats and things like that, they have a very distinctive taste. When you stop having them and then you go back to them, tastes like chemicals, and you don't want them. But when you're eating them all of the time, all the normal food tastes horrible because it's just a bit bland, because it's just not synthetic. So often with children, if they're used to having things like squash and flavored this, that, and the other, when you try to give them a real food, you can get, why aren't you eating it, and get quite frustrated with them and think, well, they're not really trying this, they're not really engaging in meals. Could be to do with their palate. So I always try to suggest with children, to develop that palate from a very young age in terms of a cross-section of foods and to avoid the synthetic things. Is this a question? Is that no? No, sorry, I just got distracted with the hand up, but now I can't see where it's. I told you I'd get distracted with this chat box, so I'm going to just sneak it back over there and carry on, because I have the attention span of a gnat. Obviously, anything that comes near me, I get confused. But all of these different areas that are on this slide are all different chapters, apart from skin. I just threw that one in there. Are all different chapters in my book, and there's so much to each of them that it's too much to go into in this webinar, but it's showing hopefully the jigsaw of health and how all the different things link together. So we're going to move on. I don't know if they've all finished wiggling, because as I say, I can't see them. Here we go. So moving on. So where does it lurk? It lurks everywhere, I tell you. So predominantly, I've picked on these because these are the things that really bug me, because these are the things that are actually quite easy to replicate and cheaper to replicate, but they're really cleverly marketed to families as, you know, a way of getting nutrients into children and a way of making your life easier by having our fortified, amazing, healthy, nutritious drinks, snacks, products for children. Sneaky manufacturers. I'm going to launch another poll. I've got a bit poll happy in this webinar, so just bear with me while I find the next and last poll on this one about sugar-free foods and what you might find a struggle to sort of recreate or replicate those types of foods, which are generally full of sugar. So just collating those responses while you have a think about them. They're coming in. Again, it's quite a good cross-section. There's no real standout at the moment of any of these particular things. Let's just see, we're at 67%, so they're still waiting on some people to decide. And then we will launch the results. We're nearly there. 92%. Nearly there. So it's quite interesting. The things I thought might be standouts are actually not standouts, but all will be revealed in a moment. We're at 92%. Somebody's undecisive today on this last 8% to come in. We will give them another minute because they may have nipped out to get a drink the last few. So we'll just go for another couple of seconds and then we will launch the results and just see where we're at. Right, we're done. Okay. So let's share those results for you. So I thought the standout would actually be drinks, because they are often the most common source of free sugars in children, particularly older children. I'm surprised that it's pasta sauces and sort of jars of sauces and cereals, but that's good. I have solutions. I always have solutions. Yogurts, 8%. Yep. Yogurts, I think people have got quite wise to yogurts over the last few years and a bit savvy to manufacturers and what they do with them. So let's hide that. So you should get me back. There we go. I'm back. Yes. So I have some examples of foods now, which we're going to have a look at. So yogurts, spread, and drinks. So some examples of these and actually what they actually contain. So these yogurts obviously advertised and labelled quite heavily for children. Now, under advertising laws, anything that is a high sugar product or an unhealthy product shouldn't be characterised for children, but often, obviously, they are, and they shouldn't be at checkouts and they shouldn't be at eye level, nor all the things that they actually are. So if a child, all of these things are examples of a healthy breakfast, advertised as good source of calcium and vitamin D, of, you know, fortified with zinc and things like that. So all of these things actually call themselves a healthy breakfast, and they're advertised for children as a healthy breakfast. And it is interesting today, World Nutella Day, which I was horrified to realise that there was such a thing as World Nutella Day. It is one of my most hated things in the world. So the yogurt contains 8.1 grams in a recommended dose, which is 2 teaspoons of sugar. And the recommended dose of the spread is also 2 teaspoons, which is about 8.2 as well. The recommended dose for the shake is actually 5 teaspoons, which is actually 20 grams of sugar in the drink. So if a child had all of this for breakfast, it would be 9 teaspoons of sugar. And yes, they're fortified, but what nutrients are they getting in this that they couldn't have without the 9 teaspoons of sugar? Now, those 9 teaspoons of sugar are actually exceeding an adult's recommended dose of sugar intake. Now, that's not a nutrient value. That's not something that we aim for. You know, a recommended dose for sugar is actually just try not to go above that, because actually it's not very good for you. It's not like other nutrient values where it's we need 100% of, you know, vitamin C, or, you know, our recommended dose of magnesium is this, etc. With sugar, it's not that. It's just don't go above that, rather than let's try and get to 7 teaspoons. And just out of interest, there's no guidelines whatsoever for sugar intake for the under 4s, because it's not deemed as something that should be in their diet, which is quite interesting when you consider the amount of products marketed for under 4s, which contain quite a lot of sugar. The age, the bracket for 4 to 6-year-olds is 5 teaspoons a day. For 7 to 10 is 6 teaspoons. And then after that, they're considered adults, and it's 7 teaspoons a day. So that doesn't sound very much, and it really easily adds up, as you can see from the last slide with the spread, the yogurt and the drink. You know, a lot of people would think that's quite a reasonable breakfast because they've had milk, you know, they've had calcium, they've had some vitamins and minerals that milkshake has been fortified with. You know, the yogurt's saying it's good for bones because it's got calcium and vitamin D and phosphorus. And, you know, the spread is, well, I can't bring myself to have a good word to say about the spread. So, you know, but you would be forgiven for thinking that that was a reasonably healthy breakfast. It is clever marketing. And this is why when I talk about food and food manufacturers, it's never in a very complimentary way, because they have the power and they know exactly how to use it. So that's, oh, hang on a second, hold your horses. So what to do? Don't trust the products. I'm not saying that as a massive conspiracy theorist. It's just they get away with things. They get away with calling things healthy. They can put vitamin D, zinc, and magnesium in a product, which could be 70% sugar, and they will be able to call it healthy because it's been fortified with things that children are generally lacking. Those children can get those things in normal foods, but of course it's easier to just put it in a product and say it's fortified and here you go, have this. There's no need for the sugar. That's, you know, just to make it palatable. But making your own is not more expensive. You know, one of my big things with healthier food is to actually make it affordable and achievable and realistic to everybody's lifestyle. My book, all the recipes in there don't take very long to cook, apart from slow cooker ones, because I know what it's like to have, you know, a small child needing your attention. You cannot be at a pan. I made a risotto for the first time in 5 years the other week because I realized that I hadn't actually been able to stand at a pan and stir it because of him, but now he's 5, I can. So all of the recipes have to be easy, they have to be healthy, they have to be affordable, and it is completely doable. Not only does that make lots of considerable health improvements, but it makes their palate a lot better. They are more, it is easier to cook for them, and it is more pleasurable at meal times when their palate is better developed and more susceptible to new tastes and new ideas and being involved in the food and things like that, because they actually are, their palate is better, is more receptive of food. When it's a synthetic palate, they will tend to reject a lot of the food you give them if it isn't synthetic, and that can be extremely frustrating. Hopefully a little video about sugar. I'll stop talking so you can watch it. Right, so there we go. Let's get rid of that one. So how can I help? So obviously this webinar is an introduction to, has a hand up. Let me just see what the hand up is. Hand. No, sorry, I'm getting confused with the hands raised again. I don't know what to do with them. Sorry, bear with me. I will come back to you at the end. So my book is not just about not having sugar, it's about all the interlocking elements of health that I have been alluding to through the webinar. I also do family consultations. This is a lot more detailed. It's a lot where I look at things like what might be affecting your child's concentration, so what might be affecting your child's sleep behavior, etc. So it's a look at nutritional deficiencies, and that's not a negative thing. And most people are deficient, adults as well. It's just let's look at what might be not quite there, so we can actually work out how to make improvements. There's vouchers in handouts for that. There's also, I do lots and lots of information on social media. I have lots of different themes. At the moment it's heart health, which is obviously more adult led, although going back to the children and adult diseases, we have children with high cholesterol, not family linked, but we have children with high blood pressure, again not family linked. So they're not exempt from all the things we used to think of just as adults. And there's lots of free downloads on my website as well. You have in the handouts, one of the recipes on there is a recipe for avocado chocolate mousse, which is good as it's not using sugar or anything like that. So it's one of your handouts is for that. How I have helped, just to put up there, this is a particular quote about sugar, and this lady who was really struggling. Now, if you imagine ADHD, autism, the emotional aspect and the stress and anxiety that those children can feel is obviously a lot heightened a lot of the time, and the communication of displaying that can be quite different to, you know, a child without it. And so sugar was really exacerbating that stress and anxiety and, you know, the behavioral issues, and that the difference in that household, just by working with me and making not massive changes, but just, you know, swaps, easy swaps, you know, for food, for drinks, for, you know, meals and things like that, different relationships. So not always, oh, you've been really good, you've deserved this. Changing that relationship, and as Kerry says that, you know, quite simply, Louise, has been life-changing, which is amazing to hear when you work with people. But it's just the impact that it has. It's the impact that sugar can give, and if you remove it, what can actually happen. It's an extreme. There are extreme cases of people I've worked with where it has literally been, we couldn't leave the house and now we can. And there are less extreme cases where, oh, okay, yeah, they're a lot calmer now, or the teacher says they can concentrate a bit more. This is an extreme, which is why I wanted to use it. But there's lots of examples which are sort of more just sort of like you could probably relate to in terms of, well, that might just make a bit of difference, but we don't need a huge change. So your handouts, you should be able to access handouts for the avocado chocolate mousse. And I've also put together a top tip document for you in terms of, you know, what to look out for and things like that, my main sort of suggestions and recommendations. And then I have got some discount codes. So you will be able to access these with the discount codes that are unique to me. So Chewy Moon Box, our kids subscription box. I'm not paid to advertise this by any means. It's just something that if I find something that I'm happy about, I'm quite happy to talk about it, because it's created by nutritionists and parents, and absolutely no nasties in them, and they're a really fun box, and they come with lots of stickers which children like. And Owen has been very excited to come home from school every day and tuck in, and I try and pinch a morsel, and they are delicious. So Chewy Moon Box, there's a unique code there. You can download the code. You can download that as a voucher. And then Ugly drinks. So I hate artificial sweeteners, as you know. Fizzy drinks, often full of them, and if they're not full of them, then they're full of sugar. But even the sugar ones now have artificial sweeteners in. So it's really good to find a sparkling drink that doesn't contain any of those nasties. So again, there's a unique code, Louise Gets Ugly, which is marvellous, for those drinks as well. So feel free to use them and give them a try, because I don't recommend, I'm very, very fussy, as we should be with the foods that we eat. So it's not often that I'll actually think, oh, I found something, I can shout about it. And then there is a voucher, Sugarboo as the code for the book, which is for 20% off my book. And then if you want to take things further, there is absolutely no obligation to. This is a free webinar. You can just go and that's fine. Hopefully I will have been of some help. But if something's resonated and you think, actually, you might want to look at this a bit further, heavily discounted one-to-one, it could be for a workplace if you work in an early years setting, looking at that, or it could be for a family. So very much tailored to situations. I work in both homes and professional early years environments. So how to keep in touch with me as well. So I will follow up on the webinar. I will go through the chat box, which I haven't been able to locate during the webinar, so apologies for that. But I will go through that. I produce a report. I will get back with individual questions, and I am all the contact details here you will have. And as I say, I'm active on social media. So do feel free to keep in touch. And I think we're now bang on finish time. So let me come to the chat box now and see if I can actually find it to talk to you. Let's hide that for a moment. See if I can find you. So it is 8:15, just after 8:15. So if you do need to go, absolutely fine. As I say, I will find the chat box and I will come back to you. Here we go. There we go. There is actually only one question, so I haven't missed loads, so that's fine. So yes, cereal alternatives. Okay. Basically, the more natural, the better with cereals. So plain oats are fantastic. I have lots of recipes for porridge and how to make porridge more exciting using things like cacao, honey, banana, natural, not honey if they're under one. So lots of suggestions in there for that. Also, just getting more inventive. We have a little like food processor, a tiny thing, which we use to whiz up all sorts of things. Chia seeds, natural yogurt, any sort of fruit, bung it in there. The chia seeds expand overnight. And it's like a really thick sort of moussey thing. Great for breakfast, especially with banana. Lots of homemade spreads in the book. So spreads like peanut butter, my not Nutella, very appropriate for today, which is basically cacao, hazelnuts, maple syrup, and avocado in a spread. Really nutritious. It's about how many nutrients can I get in this product? That's how I always come at it. So for breakfast, we want things that are going to give a really stable blood sugar through the morning and lots of nutrients for concentration. So I would stick with things like slow release oats and complex carbs. And I mean, if you have to just do a Weetabix is fine. There is some sugar in there, but adding, a face like banana and blueberry and things like that makes it a bit more exciting. So hopefully that's answered the cereal question. And any other questions I will come back to. So yes, thank you all for attending, and I shall follow up on emails.